All right. So I hope that didn't reflect badly. Perhaps my search for animist technology is just, incompetence derived. I hope I didn't give that impression. Anyway, okay, maybe I'll talk a little bit about my background. I'm a refugee from the sciences, actually. I have even though I'm an artist, media artist, I work in video, sound. I do some hardware, so there's sensors and stuff involved. I started out, I went to the National Science High School in Manila, and then I studied biology, first in the Philippines and then in Hiroshima in Japan. At a certain point, I switched to philosophy because I felt that the questions or the things that I wanted to explore were not really in the purview of science. And then I switched to philosophy, and while I was studying philosophy, I got sort of shanghaied into taking some film workshops with my friends in the Mobile Fund Film Institute, of which the Goethe Institute was a very big supporter. So that was where the Philippine experimental film scene started. And I became an experimental filmmaker, got sidetracked I found that using the tools of filmmaking was more interesting than making films for me. So I started using the Betamax machines, the VHS machines, the projectors, the computers, and so now I work with like microphones, computers, video cameras, things like that. So I have a science background, and I use a lot of machines in my work. And I do a lot of installations now. Okay. Now, this lecture is called Notes Towards an Animist Technology, but if you think I'm a bit uncomfortable calling it a lecture, because I always thought of lectures as being something that you had a point to make, you knew what the point was, it started at A and ended at Z, and you sort of like went through the letters until you got to your destination. And this is not that sort of talk. I mean, I have given that kind of talk before. You can ask my friends, so I actually can. But because of the sort of subject matter of this, it's going to be more of a spiral form, I think. Basically, it's because I want to find, basically these are like a collection of, basically I'm trying to figure out what it would mean to talk about an animist technology. I'm not even sure when I exactly thought of the phrase. I might have been trying to talk about something about my art or something about somebody else's art, but I thought, animist technology, what could that mean? And it suddenly seemed to hit a lot of chords because of the world that we have today, climate change, oceans of plastic, all of that. It seems very related to the idea to the metaphor that's always animated technology and science, where it's always about conquest, the conquest of nature. And I was thinking, what would be a technology that used a different verb? It's like the seduction of nature or the surrender to nature or something like that. So the idea of animist technology is like that. What would be a technology that was based on a different verb or different metaphors of dealing with the forces of nature? So, yeah. And I maybe should make a note about like animism. There is no animism really as a word. I mean, it's not like a word like apple or toaster. It doesn't actually have like a correlate in the real world. Historically, the idea was that it was a way of classifying a bunch of religions, of cultural practices, calling them animist religions. And they were like, and this was an effort, an anthropological idea where they were trying to classify like Siberian shamanic traditions and Japanese Shinto and maybe the kind of religion practiced by the Ifugao in the Cordillera in the Philippines as being all sort of the same sort of religions, basically, that thought that, things like rocks or buildings or trees had souls or had what the Japanese call kami. They were like inhabited by gods, or they had some kind of spiritual aspect to them. And this was when this term was starting to be used, it was associated with like this anthropological conceit that there was a kind of Darwinian evolution of religions. And of course, animism, the idea that, everything has a soul, was considered pretty low on the evolutionary scale. It was sort of like the fish form of religion on its way to becoming, a human religion kind of thing. But so the idea kind of animism as an idea sort of fell out of favor. But in the time of the Anthropocene, in the time of climate change, it's become sort of respectable again as a kind of word around which you could have conversations about different ways of dealing with nature, the kind of ideas that animate technology and industry, and basically the ills of mass production and exploitation of the earth. So it's a way it ties into that conversation very, very easily. So, like we said, this was would be clearer if this was like in full screen. But basically, it was like I just Googled science conquest, and there were like all these books that came out with it's like the conquest of man in space, conquest of energy, all of these things. So it's a very, very popular way of talking about what technology does, what humans who create machines do. They conquer things. So basically, I was thinking that this is sort of like one of the clues, what does it mean when you're saying conquer, conquer, conquer? It seems to talk about, it presupposes that man is at two with the universe, like Woody Allen said, I'm at two with the universe. It's a very exceptionalist way of, it implies a very exceptionalist way of viewing the world. There's man, and then there's like everything else, and he gets to dispose of everything else the way he sees fit. So I spoke about this. It really is kind of, it ties into like a critique of like the Anthropocene. I want to also mention that I'm going to talk in this, this talk is a little bit about like the clues and hints that seem to tie into this idea or further the idea of an animist technology. And as part of the talk, I'm going to talk about my artworks. And this is like one of them. This is called Bell. And I hope that it doesn't appear to be like shameless self-promotion. My defense in like including some of my works is that it's part of the way I think through things. Making things is sort of like, is part of the way I think about things. Sometimes I have this idea that, okay, make something that does this. And then afterwards, I sort of look at it and think, okay, so what is actually in this thing? What does it mean? What does it do? And that's the way that methodology is reflected in this talk. So anyway, and of course, since I was born, raised, I live and work in the Philippines, I'll be talking a little bit also about like the Philippines because that's where I see a lot of my clues. A lot of the Philippines is one of those places. This is the Philippines, 7,000 islands. Not. I thought it was a huge number, but apparently it's nowhere near like the maximum number of islands in the world. Like we have 7,000. Indonesia 17,000, Norway 55,000, and Sweden apparently 221,000 islands. So, not as special as we thought. Anyway, here, this is a very famous quote by William Gibson. The future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And I've always, Manila is one of the places where, not only is the future badly distributed there, but even modernity can lie thin on the ground. So if you're trying to think against like contemporary ideas, it's a good place to be in because that's where like the past pokes up through the skin of the present. Very often, you turn the corner and like, you're in the 19th century or the 17th century even sometimes. There's it's a very Manila, and we go to the theme of the festival. It's a very liminal place. There are things. It's in between a lot of things in many senses. It's caught between. There's a lot of folk Catholicism, so mixes of Catholic practice with, let's say, animist practices, magical practices. So it's caught between like animism and like a book religion, people of the book kind of religion, like Roman Catholicism and Islam. It's between like feudalism and capitalism. It's often described as being a semi-feudal or a semi-colonial place. So it's also between being a colony and an independent nation state. Linguistically, it's all between like tens of languages, aside from Spanish and English, which many speak English, very few people, but some people still speak Spanish, and then there's like tens of languages also. So, and this language, and just to go on a little bit, the languages are also often reflective of class. So even if there were two Manileños, like me and another Manileño, if we're of different classes, we might actually speak different languages at home, and maybe even, at home and on the street. Like, my English is very good because I went to an exclusive school in Manila, because my parents could afford to send me there. But somebody else who went to public school or something would probably have an accent that would give them away unless they were very, very, very good at, and were very conscious about like shaving all those influences away. So the class differences are very, very intense, which ties into like the feudal thing. So it's a very liminal place, like I said, just to repeat myself. And anyway, here, just a little bit of context. The Philippines is that little place with the circle. We're near the equator. We're about like 10,000 kilometers away from Berlin, and then 11,500 kilometers away from Spain, which was the force that turned us into the Philippines. Before, we were like a bunch of islands with like tens of languages, and I'm not talking dialects, like languages with different verbs and different nouns and different grammatical rules, in the middle of the ocean. And then the Spaniards came and drew a circle around it and basically said, okay, you're one nation state. You're our colony. All of you belong, are one thing. And these are illustrations from the Boxer Codex. It was kind of an ethnographic account of the Philippines. They got a Chinese painter, it looks like watercolor, to make portraits of the races of the Philippines. And so you can see that they are quite different, and the next one might show how different. I mean, the ones above were wearing gold and maybe silks from China, and I think that a lot of them were Islamic. Yeah. And here you have like the ones who are like heavily tattooed and basically wearing loincloths, hunting with bows and arrows, like that. So we were a very varied number of very varied cultural groups that became fused into the Philippines by force majeure. And then of course the Spaniards drew that circle around the Philippines in order to make us a colony. And there are vestiges of basically the Philippine economy is still cast in the mold of having been a colony. So this is like these guys are harvesting sugarcane. It's like still a major export, as is coconut. And basically the Philippines is an agricultural country with like, about half of the agriculture of the land is agricultural land. 75% of the labor force are dependent on agriculture. So it's basically an agricultural country. 70% of the farmers don't have lands, so they're basically serfs. They're effectively feudal tenants working for somebody else who owns the land. So aside from being an agricultural place, the Philippine economy is kind of tied up in a kind of semicolonial structure where like a lot of the land is tied up in like producing for export. So the Philippines is not actually food secure. In fact, we're actually importing rice these days. So there is an aspect of it being a semi-colonial place. This is Quiapo Church. It has been around since it was been razed and destroyed several times in the 1500s. It's a center of religious feeling in Manila, and the place where there's some very very dodgy religious practices that have to do with practices which are frowned upon by the church, but are still there, like being sold by vendors in plain sight outside the church. The Catholic religion has played a very, very big role in Philippine history, and it's still very thick on the ground. I mean, Christmas starts being celebrated in September. Holy Week, like Black Friday, everything is closed the entire weekend. You have people, you probably have seen this. We still have Filipinos who basically reenact the crucifixion on Holy Week. So it's a very, very religious Catholic place that's given to extreme expressions of religion. And this is sort of like one of those extreme expressions. Even though Catholicism was basically a tool of subjugation by the Spaniards, it was also remixed to create a language of liberation. So a lot of the critiques of the injustices of the Spaniards was couched in Christian metaphor. So this was a shirt that's filled with like Christian but also magical signs, which was supposed to render the wearer invulnerable. So it's basically a magic shirt that was worn by like some of the peasant rebels when they were like when they were conducting rebellions against Spain. These are some of the things that are sold outside Quiapo Church. So there's like that's the Santo Niño, the Christ child figure. We love the Santo Niño in the Philippines. In the center, that's a fortune teller. So there are fortune tellers also just outside Quiapo Church. And then on the right, there's a person selling. My right, when I'm looking, your right, is a person who's selling these anting. Basically, they're magical amulets that look like this. Basically, this one is very interesting because you can see that there's all sorts of iconography there. There's stuff which probably looks Masonic to you, the eye inside the triangle, this one. There's nonsense Latin, things that sound like Latin but make no sense at all. There's things that don't seem to have any analog, like this one, Zagin, Zagui, Zagu. It's basically just magical formula. This one is called the Kambal Tuko. Basically, it's Siamese twin. That's what it means. Twins who are sort of like joined and inseparable twins, and it's a love charm. Probably a pre-colonial idea, this one. So there's a mix of like animism, magical Catholicism, there's like Masonic stuff. It's really all of a kind of a very, very dense blur and mix of religious and magical thinking. This one's an interesting one. It's basically the Santo Niño, the Christ child with a flagrant erection. It's obviously a fertility symbol. So it's sort of like it's the the talisman of couples who want to have a child. I like this one just because the baby is the product And he's also because with the erection, he's also the source, that which creates him. So it seems kind of like, it makes me think of Ouroboros, this kid. This one is another sign of Philippine, let's say, religious feeling. This is a ficus, a strangling ficus. It's a species that's related to the banyan tree, the tree that the Buddha sat under. It's I don't know if you've ever seen one, but it's quite grotesque looking. The branches go out, creepers go down. If the creepers, if the vines hit the ground, they basically take root, and it grows sideways, becoming bigger and bigger with multiple trunks. In the Philippines, it's considered the place where, even now, even straight Catholics consider it the place where spirits live, And that's why it's standing alone in the middle of a highway. It's because the idea is that if you harm the tree, you will be harmed in turn. You and maybe your family will be harmed in turn because the spirits will get mad at you. And I think this is another sort of clue. Here's a clue, because what is respect for nature if not leaving a tree in the middle of the road and then just like making your way around it? It's like, whatever. I'm not cutting that down. Drive around it if you know what's good for you. So this is an animist idea, I think. The idea that the world is not ours to dispose of, that other things have a say in it. It's a key image to maybe thinking about a kind of humility. Man is not like the conqueror. It's like there are some things which you maybe are best left unconquered. So leave the tree there, kind of thing. The same respect is extended to anthills. We call them, because they're supposed to be the place where the nuno sa punso live. Punso is anthill. Basically, punso means mound. So nuno sa punso means the elder grandfather, the elder of the mound. And basically, the idea also is that you do not disturb this if you know what's good for you. So there's still there's still a very, very deep, there are limited but deep-seated beliefs in a spirit world and spirits of things that are invisible, that occasionally make themselves visible, that you have to negotiate with. These are coconut larvae from the coconut beetles. And I use this as part of an artwork. What happens is that when there's a crack in the bark of a coconut tree, no, actually this one, they were not the coconut tree. They were the bark of the kaong tree. It's a sugar palm. So basically, the pith is completely filled with sugar. And if the pith cracks, if the bark cracks because of a typhoon or whatever, and the female lays her eggs in there, then the tree, the trunk, becomes infested with hundreds of thousands of these larvae. And there are so many, and they're huge. They're about the size of my thumb, like that. There are so many of them that you can actually hear them, and that's where their name comes from. They're called gook, because that's the sound that they make when they're crawling through the tree. Eating their way through the tree, basically. They're like, they eat from one end, excrete on the other, and just basically tunnel through. They're edible, of course, primarily eaten by males when they're drinking. So it's kind of there's a kind of a machismo. Eating it is a kind of like associated with like male bonding, like that. And I use them in this installation, which does this. On one end of the room, there was a log, which I cut. It had already fallen, and I just transported it. I didn't cut it myself. I just made it look pretty, cut the ends, so that it looked like a log, mounted the log. Above the log, the log is filled with coke, and above the log there were like recordings of the cook. I wanted it to be live, to be just like amplified, but the feedback was so bad, I just recorded it and then played it. So basically, you could hear what the cook were doing. You could hear them here in these headphones, and you could hear them here in this set of headphones. And this set of headphones is next to a drawing tablet, which ran a program, which I actually used here the other day. It was the program that I used when I was performing with Peter, where it was an audiovisual instrument, where when you draw a line, like that, basically the drawing gesture is repeated over and over and over while producing sound. So you can create like these Brian Eno-ish or Brian Eno on speed-ish kind of like rhythms with them. And of course, incidentally, the things that do make these sounds look like, worms, look like kook, So the idea was that I was, I think, very clumsily trying to make a kind of ritual of sacrifice where interacting with the animal gave you the right to eat it because you had, basically danced with it. You had like shown it respect. You had interacted with it, with its Buddha nature, its spiritual nature, before you took its life force for your own. So this is a picture of the log, which I put some funnels in there so that I could hydrate it. I was afraid that it would lack water, leaking from the sides of the log. Behind it, over here, there was an aquarium filled with like the kuok, just so people could know what they looked like. And then at the end of the week, it was this at the art fair, of people like interacting and paying homage to the kuok. We split the log open, fried all the kuok, and then fed them to the audience. I want to take a minute and gloat about what a brilliant idea that was, because I discovered certain dynamics in doing that I had no idea would happen. Like, because as soon as you get them, first of all, they smell great when they're frying. They've been eating sugar, so when you fry them, they smell like caramel. They smell like pancakes. And that means that kids who just know that they smell pancakes and say parang, they'll try one, they have no taboos, and then the kid says, that was good. Can I have another one? And the dynamic that I really, really liked was that any adult male within hearing distance of that kid immediately becomes obligated to eat one of those worms. Because you cannot let the kid eat the worm and then you go back and tell your friends, no, I didn't eat it, it was disgusting. You can't do that. So that was one of the things that sort of like made a lot of people who wouldn't have ordinarily eaten it, eat it. And then of course you can see there's a limited number, it's going down, so there's like the machismo thing, and then it's like if you don't do it now, you won't get it later, like that. There was all that. So a lot of people ate this stuff. And once you've done it, of course, they're taking the selfie with it, bragging on social media. So their friends now have to, have this exaggerated impression of the desirability to eat it. So that really went well. That went like fire. Okay. And I don't want to say, because I showed you the tree thing, right? The Philippines is not like some kind of exemplar of respect for nature places. I mean, we're a semi-colony, so there are a lot of ecological disasters there. I guess there's no other way to put it, like ecological disasters which are caused by capitalism. A lot of the people are very, very poor, so they often buy. So we're kind of like a pioneer in making these things, which are called single-use sachets. So if you want, basically, I want to wash my hair. I'll pay 2 pesos, 3 pesos for a sachet of shampoo that will only contain enough shampoo to wash my hair once. And then, that's a plastic package, throw it away. And you wind up getting, creeks that look like this. We are the third most worst source of discarded plastic in the world, second only to 2 other Asian nations, China and Indonesia, apparently. So we generate something like 2.7 million tons of plastic, and about 20%, or 500,000 tons, finds its way to the ocean. So there's that. There's the Philippines. That's sort of like. So these are 2 things that are happening in the Philippines, and they're both clues. So they're sort of like they both touch on the idea of an animist technology. One hand, it shows like exceptionalist technology, conquest technology, out of control, destroying the planet. And then on the other hand, there's still remnants of ideas of the spirit which are protecting very, very random things there, like trees and anthills. This is another clue. This happens to be a work of mine here. Yeah. Uh-huh. See that? Let me try that again, see if I can get the video out. Okay, I can't. But anyway, basically what it is was a bicycle with 2 friction bells on the side, which are driven by the pedals. And then the brake handles, when you press the brake handles, they put the friction wood against it, and you get the 2 bells are slightly detuned. So they go whoa, 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 that thing, and it creates this drone that takes over the entire room wherever it's being played. This is how it looks, like that. And it's a reference to this guy. He's a manghahasa, a sharpener, an itinerant sharpener. There's still very few of them still around. It's an old trade and a dying one. But basically, they would go around the neighborhoods and just basically say hasa. And whoever wants to brings out knives and garden shears and scissors, whatever, and give them to him, and he'll park in front of your gate, and then he'll sharpen your things for you. So this was kind of the work was a kind of a reference to that, and maybe a kind of I thought of it as a kind of like a prayer, that this guy or a celebration of this guy who goes around spinning wheels and sharpening blades, and taking care of his family. This one is called Breath Machine, and it's one of like the earlier things that I made that was not a film. Basically, you had 2 detuned flutes. I'm big on detuned sound sources that were also like basically creating this wow, whoa, 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 very low buzz. So I was thinking of like some kind of an industrial machine that had to do with breathing. So it was kind of like it was featuring some kind of breath. This one is bell. Again, this is sort of like drone based. Basically, it's a 10 foot wide shell of metal that's vibrating, that's plugged into an electromagnet that's plugged into the wall socket. So it vibrates at whatever the hertz of the power is. So I guess here it would be 50 hertz. In the Philippines, it's like 60 hertz. But because it's an imperfect object, it's vibrating like at other multiples of that frequency. So it's a very complex sound. And when I was playing it in Singapore, I installed it in Singapore, there was a woman who was like an Indian woman, so that I think there was a cultural predisposition there, who was saying that she could hear chanting in the sounds like that. I really liked that comment because I thought of it as a kind of an industrial prayer wheel. Again, I guess there's this bit about like making something sacred with profane materials, like that, some kind of invocation to the spirits, the invisible world. But anyway, some participating in like something which was not profane. It was a machine, an object. I think all of these things, which I just bell and whatever, they were that. There's that. They're sort of like trying to be sacred machines. And that's sort of like the stuff that I do, I think, can be read that way, that I'm trying to make machines do impossible things, or things that are improper things, that are not sort of thought of as being in the purview of secular science, secular technology, like that. Manila, after it was conquered by the Spanish, was conquered by the Americans. The Spanish sold us to the Americans, and then in World War II, conquered by the Japanese, and was decisively liberated by bombing by the Americans in 1945. So there was one Jesuit who was like describing it as saying that there was not a stone left upon a stone. And Manila was essentially, which is a very, very small city at that time, was basically destroyed. And once it was destroyed, it spread past the walls of Intramuros, the main city of Manila, and became the megalopolis that it is today, with the plastic rivers and the jeepneys. We have some of the worst traffic in the world. So this is another bit where this part of the clue is that Manila is the place where you can really see the consequences of like technology and runaway technology under market forces at work. So after Manila was bombed, its transit system, public transit system, and there was a good one before. We had cable cars and whatever, was never restored. And the iconic jeepney was created from jeeps that the Americans left, and basically has remained a major mode of transportation after a good, almost like three-quarters of a century. So we have some of the worst traffic in the world, and I was measuring it just like on Waze, and the average speed of driving through, some of the CTM team know this, of driving through Manila is about 12 kilometers per hour. So yes, when I was like riding in an Uber here, there was one of the drivers was like telling me, "Well, the traffic is always so bad at this time of day in Berlin." And of course, I had to ha 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 ha. You know not of you speak. I had to enlighten him as to what really bad traffic meant, because I thought, you don't know how good you've got it, And then again, we also have like views like this. There is one of the other things that Manila doesn't have. We don't have eminent domain. So the government cannot just, because we have as part of the Spanish conquest, landlords have a lot of power, and actually most of the politicians came from the landlord class before. So the government cannot just decide to buy your house to build a highway through it. It's very, very difficult. So as a result, public works and infrastructure are very, very difficult to build. So there's no what do you call this? Cheap public housing. Public transportation is very bad, and as a result, a lot of the people who come from the provinces basically squat, and it's not like squat like Renate or something. It's squat as in like this. There's no running water, there's no electricity, and there's sometimes electricity because they steal it from the power company. And basically all the garbage sewage goes into the rivers like that. And you'll always, if you look for these kinds of, if you talk about like illegal settlements, informal settlements, that's the politically correct term now. All of the photographs usually look like this because they are so cramped that there is no free space to take a photograph of it otherwise unless there's water. Or railroad tracks, like that. This is, yeah. There was another video that I want to show, and I'm just afraid that it So yeah, that's a public transportation system. He basically pushes them, even across bridges. That's what this was. That's what this is. It's called a trolley. And again, this is like, in a way, this one, I like this clue because this is a machine, hand-built, and it's only there because the government is basically sleeping on the job and has not managed to figure out how to give public infrastructure to the people who live there. And so they make these machines and basically live like, I suppose they're sort of like parasitic on the train system. They use the rails of the train system and then basically pick up these machines, which are very, very, very light. They're made of bamboo, so they're very strong, very light. Go away, wait for the train to pass, put it back down, and everybody piles on and they keep on going like that. So it shows it's a very, very, very well-engineered machine. It shows a lot of ingenuity, but it's in the ingenuity in the midst of government failure, I guess. Like that. This is another clue I have. These are the candles that are sold outside Quiapo Church. And they're different colors because different candles are supposed to be good for certain, they have different efficacies. Green candles are for money, white is for birthday wishes, things like that. But my favorite is the black candle. Because when you ask what the black candle is for, they say to bother the conscience of the evildoer, which is a euphemism for revenge. God makes something bad happen to this guy. And so you actually burn these candles. It's basically voodoo, like a voodoo. Basically a magical act of vengeance, And they sell them, you can burn them next to the vendor, but I've also seen them burned alongside the votive candles in the Catholic, in Quiapo Church. Of course, it's frowned on. You're not supposed to sort of curse your neighbor. by the church, but it remains that way. It's unstoppable. It's magic. This is a work of mine for basically it's a small video installation for Teddy, the guy who's wearing it. He lost his eye. He's the chairman, I think, of the NCCA now, I think, at least the film committee, and he lost his eye. So I made this video installation for him sort of like as a prayer for his eye. Again, it's sort of like it's a magical machine that wants to give him an eye, but of course is absolutely a failure at giving him an eye because does not have an eye. What he does have is this video eye, and then sometimes it'll have it's a video of his own eye. It'll show like a bunch of words that mean eye, so 40 words for eye in various languages. There's a scrolling bit of Latin that will say, in a country of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. None of which will ever give him back an eye, but it's basically a machine that is, a prayer for a lost eye kind of thing. This was a short film, one of the first ones that I made. It's in 16mm film. Basically, the idea was that if you shot a film through a 2-peso coin, a 2-peso bill, which was basically associated with Marcos, the Philippine dictator, then you'd be able to send message information through the time stream so that you could reach another person who's on the bill, Jose Rizal, the national hero. So I made this film while reading a lot of Carl Gustav Jung. So again, it was trying to make a film which was not a representation of reality, but an actual magical artifact that would do something. It was supposed to perform an act of magic. So a friend of mine was calling this a mock documentary, but I was thinking of it really more as basically not a documentary. It was a documentary of an experiment. I called it an experiment. It was in the form of a lab report. Magic. This is a door that knocks when you walk in front of it. There's, of course, it's a very primitive sense. A high schooler could make it. Senses somebody in front of it and it knocks like that. The thing that I liked about it is that I made code that changed the knock like that. And it changed the knock by sampling the noise of an exposed pin. So in theory, it was sort of like the I Ching. It's sampling something in the room that the person walking in front of it is. So again, this is kind of Jungian, or a bit like quantum mechanics, the idea of two things affecting each other because they've been in touch. The idea was that because it was sampling the room where the subject was, that it would have some kind of line into his fate, and that created the knock, which he would be free to interpret as he saw fit. So it's very primitive programming, but it's also very orthodox magical practice. And then I associate the idea, why magic, and it has to do, I think, with the fact that magic is the link between subjectivity, what we think, and action, things that happen in the world. And you can say that people have talked about the logical fallacy of magical thinking, the confusing your own ideas with actual action. But that's It could be a metaphor, but that's the link. The idea that what we think matters. The idea that something as ephemeral as spirit or desire has an effect or some right in the world. And that idea is echoed by this quote from Paul Tillich. He's a Christian theologian. I'll read it, even if you can read it, because I just like the sound of it. There are no things in nature, that is, no objects which are nothing but objects, but which have no element of subjectivity. But objects that are produced by the technical force, by the technical act, are things. It belongs to man's freedom in the technical act that he can transform natural objects into things, trees into wood, horses into horsepower, men into quantities of work power. In transforming objects into things, he destroys their natural structures and relations. But something also happens to man when he does this, as it happens to the objects which he transforms. He himself becomes a thing among things. I think Marx called this reification. It's the opposite of animism, where you don't attribute a soul to a tree, but you turn a soul into a thing. I see it as a kind of a commentary, an echoing and reinforcing of the idea that magic is a manifestation of our power to think and to choose. And this is like, the classic example of human exceptionalism. This is like what happens. This is like the consequence of the consequence of bad metaphysics on a geological scale. This is the Semirara mine, the Panian mine in Semirara Island in the Philippines. It's an open cut operation, 55 square miles on Semirara Island, and people have died here because of collapse. So if you think that, it's because of human exceptionalism that you think that you can raise an island, destroy the tree cover, and treat an island as a place where you could dig it up and sell it. Basically, dig up and sell an island. It's the consequence of bad metaphysics. And we always think of metaphysics like a very ephemeral idea, but this means that it's a bad metaphysics can have consequences on a geological level and can actually be fatal. It's another view. It's an aerial view, so that's how big it is. It's a wound. Conquest. This is an illustration from, I don't know how you pronounce this, De Revolutionibus Orbium Celestium by Copernicus, where he proposed an heliocentric solar system. I've been thinking that the most interesting thing about Copernicus is not that he was able to think that the sun was the center of the world, of the solar system, but that he was able to think that the Earth was one planet among many. So basically, he demoted the Earth. I'll just call this logical operation like Copernican demotion. That's the reduction of status. I'm beginning to wonder whether you could talk about history as a history of Copernican demotions. It seems like a good rule of thumb to try it out on everything. What if this were not the first time it happened? What if other people do that all the time? What if animals also get depressed? What if trees also get depressed? Whatever you think is unique, it's likely that it's a member of a class. So you demote. What would happen if you demoted yourself to the member of a class? Purely from an aesthetic sense, which I don't mean for a sense of beauty, but for a sense of proportion, the idea that a man might have a unique property most of the time doesn't seem credible. Whatever property it is we're talking about, it seems much more likely that it will exist in a range of values, less and more. And then that ties into this, which is a quote from Henry Beston, an American naturalist. He said, "We need another and a wiser and perhaps more mystical concept of animals. They are not brethren, they are not underlings. They are other nations, caught with ourselves in the net of life and time, fellow prisoners of the splendor and travail of the earth." That's a very, very, very lyrical Copernican demotion, I think. We become like one among animals on the earth. There's another interesting and very lyrical Copernican demotion by Masahiro Mori. He's a Japanese roboticist who coined the term Bukimi no Tani, known in English as the uncanny valley. So he's also the founder of Robocon. From the Buddha's viewpoint, there is no master-slave relationship between human beings and machines. The two are fused together in an interlocking entity. Man achieves dignity not by subjugating his mechanical inventions, but by recognizing in machines and robots the same Buddha nature that pervades his own inner self. When he does that, he acquires the ability to design good machines and to operate them for good and proper purposes. In this way, harmony between human beings and machines is achieved. So, it's common to say that we are in the age of the Anthropocene. The geological age where man is the most important factor in shaping the planetary environment. At the same time, science, the most powerful account of reality, discounts the most central concerns of the Anthropocene. It's like as outside its concerns. Consciousness is what? Often, among the ways that science talks about consciousness is that it thinks that it's an epiphenomenon, a side effect of molecular interactions. So most of the things that we say and believe about our lives are not only untestable and falsifiable, they can be untestable and unfalsifiable in principle. So there's really no room for us. In scientific cosmogony, the modern account of what reality is leaves us out of the story of the universe of matter. But in the Anthropocene, we are a planet-shaping force. So our thoughts and ambitions are literally a force of nature. So I think the real and crucial missing link is the link between subjectivity and the material world. I'm thinking that an animist technology would start from a somethingology that precedes science and which treats subjectivity as an actual component of reality, a metaphysics with teeth that had a place for matter and spirit. And this is not that far off. I mean, there have been precedents of people thinking about this. One of them was Wolfgang Ernst Pauli, the guy who was talking about quantum spin and electron spin, one of the architects of quantum mechanics. He was also a friend of Carl Gustav Jung. And he postulated the possible existence of an unus mundi, one world, which precedes the categories of matter and spirit. If the unus mundi were real, if there was like some kind of like pre-Big Bang unity of like that where like thoughts and matter were sort of like on the same ontological plane or pre-ontological plane, this would be the condition of magic. This would be the condition under which magic would be possible, where thoughts had some kind of essential relationship to matter. this is like one of my works. It's called Spinning Jimmy. Basically, it's kind of like an ontological pun. The idea is that the person running by is actually pushing his world around. It just basically was on a shelf like 40 feet long and basically goes back and forth. It's a very, very primitive binary robot. Only just does yes or no, go to the left or go to the right. But basically, it does nothing for us. It basically just does something for itself. So I think this is sort of like on the way to thinking about animist technology. This one is sort of like living for itself kind of thing. It's not executing, it is executing my purpose, but I wanted it to not execute my purpose. How much time have I got? Okay. I'll just keep going for a bit. This is called House of Fire. Again, it's another sensor senses human and does something work, very simple. But it was quite eerie, I thought. So it was in like the storeroom. So you saw that. It's like basically a storeroom and it was still being used as a storeroom as it was working. And as when people walking by it, basically it would just make a noise once they passed by. And it was as threatening a bass noise as I could make it make. And the idea was, because they were saying, parang, oh, we're going to put you in a garden. Can you make something for a garden? And at the time I was very, 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 very angry about Duterte and a bunch of the extrajudicial killings. And I felt I didn't want to make some kind of like, chimes, kind of like peace in the garden kind of thing. I wanted something which was dangerous and like called out to people about that danger. And that's what this was doing. Maybe that's why, it was called House of Fire, because I felt, fire was, the country was on fire. So this machine was sort of like supposed to be was supposed to connect. Magic, and this one's from Alan Moore, the guy who made Watchmen. Magic in its earliest form. He actually decided to become a magician, publicly declared that he would become a magician. Magic in its earliest form is often referred to as the art. I believe this is completely literal. I believe that magic is art, and that art, whether it be writing, music, sculpture, or any other form, is literally magic. Art is, like magic, the science of manipulating symbols, words, or images to achieve changes in consciousness. The very language about magic seems to be talking as much about writing or art as it is about supernatural events. A grimoire, for example, a book of spells, is simply a fancy way of saying grammar. So grimoire is grammar, the same. Indeed, to cast a spell is simply to spell, to manipulate words, to change people's consciousness. And I believe that this is why an artist or writer is the closest thing in the contemporary world that you are likely to see to a shaman. This is a very interesting and inspiring thing for artists to read, I think. But it still could be seen as subscribing to the essential division between mind and matter. In another interview, Moore talks as if he definitely doesn't believe Moore talks as if he believes that, as a traditional magician would believe, that although art can definitely make changes in the world by putting ideas in the heads of people who then change the world, magic has traditionally thought of having the power to affect reality by other means, that they can perform actions at a distance. And I have to confess that even as a refugee from the sciences, the artistic, when I'm making something, this is something that I think I believe. This is what you think you're actually doing. You're making something that affects the world. This is a clue. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but this is like a clue to the idea of I've been back to the word, animist technology. These are tree bridges in Cherrapunji. I think Meghalaya in India. Basically, they're made from ficus roots. There are 2 trees on either side of a river, and people tie them, and then the roots basically grow and become living bridges like that. So I like this because this is a clue to animist technology. Well, first, it works with like what's there, the terroir. You work with beings. You sort of like, you don't change them. You don't cut a tree down and make the wood and get the wood and make it into a bridge. You train the tree like a bonsai maker trains his tree to help you out, and it keeps on. You don't substitute its purposes with your purpose. You borrow some of its purpose, and it borrows some of yours, something like that. I think that would be a kind of animist technology. And I think another clue to animist technology is something like cheese making or wine making, where you're dealing with terroir or wild fermentation. It's like that. It's like you're not creating a sterile environment and then getting the species that you want. You're like cooperating with it, the other spirits in the air. So winemakers do that, fermenters do that, like that, and there's this. Apparently there's experiments which are saying that you use a certain kind of cyanobacteria and you put it together with sand and I think calcium, and it will glue the sand together. So you could actually grow bricks, sort of like a cheese, like you grow cheese. You infect the bricks with cyanobacteria and they grow more bricks. Another clue to animist technology. And this is the second penultimate slide, second to the last one. And the last slide is an endorsement of the cheese making as a kind of guide, signpost to animist technology, working with the terroir. And this is from the life of Brian. He says, man 1 said, I think he said, blessed are the cheese makers. And woman says, what's so special about cheese makers? And man 2 says, well, it's obviously not meant to be taken literally. It refers to any manufacturer of dairy products. And so with that, blessed are the cheese makers. Thank you.